My son hired movers to clear out my entire house while I was at church. They called me, politely confused, before loading the truck. And in that moment, standing in the church parking lot with my Bible still tucked under my arm, I realized something was horribly, painfully wrong. I'm glad you're here, because this is one of those stories you don't believe until you witness it yourself. And I need someone to hear me, because for a long time, no one in my life wanted to. Did you like my story? Please like and subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far this story of mine travels. So let me take you back. Back to the morning that should have been quiet, ordinary, peaceful, just another Sunday in suburban North Carolina. Back to the day I thought I knew my child. Back to the moment I learned the truth the hard way. I remember waking early that Sunday, far earlier than I needed to. My house is small, 3 bedrooms, 1 level, with old hardwood floors that creak like they are clearing their throat every time you step. The sun was barely coming up, painting thin strips of gold across the kitchen table. It was supposed to be an ordinary day. I had made coffee, sat with my devotional book, and told myself that things were finally starting to feel stable again. I'm 53, divorced, a preschool teacher, a woman who has spent much of her life trying to be the emotional scaffolding for everyone else, especially my only child, my son, Ethan. He's 26, smart, charming, and complicated. And that morning, I believed, truly believed, that our relationship was on the mend. We'd had a rough year. A few arguments that spiraled into shouting matches neither of us handled well. But lately, things had softened. We were speaking again. He even texted me the night before, a short message but enough to make me smile. Hope you have a good Sunday, Mom. Nothing in those 7 words suggested what he had planned. I left home around 9 a.m. for church. I remember locking the door, turning the key, giving the knob a little jiggle to check it. I've always had that habit, ever since the divorce. Something about making sure things are secure before I walk away. Church was its usual rhythm, music, children fidgeting in pews, the familiar voices of people I've known for decades. I wasn't thinking about anything heavy. I wasn't anticipating chaos. My life may not have been perfect, but it was stable enough. But stability has a funny way of evaporating when you least expect it. Right after service ended, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Normally I wouldn't answer, but something nudged me. A tiny flicker of intuition. I stepped outside, into the cool sunlight, and answered. Hi. A man's voice said, friendly but uncertain. This is Tyler from Carolina Movers. We're at your address for the full house clearance, but before we start loading the truck, we just want to confirm a few details with you. I think my heart stopped. Full? What? I asked, almost whispering. He repeated it. Full house clearance. Everything to be removed today. We're just making sure the furniture matches the inventory list. Inventory list. Furniture removal. Everything out. And suddenly my body went cold, like my blood had turned to ice water. I didn't schedule anything, I said. There was a pause. A long one. I could hear footsteps, wind, someone shuffling papers. Well, it looks like your son did. Those words lodged themselves in my chest. Not just confusion, not just fear, something deeper, something that felt like the ground beneath me tilting. My son. My voice cracked. Yes, Ethan Carter. He's got a signed work order here. Says it's authorized on the property. He told us you'd be out for the day and that everything was ready to go. I remember looking around as if someone might run up and tell me it was a prank, a misunderstanding, a mistake. But it wasn't. I could hear the movers in the background, lifting things, talking among themselves. And then one of them said, faint but clear through the phone, she didn't pack anything. This is all still set up like someone lives here. My throat went dry, because I did live there. It was my home, my entire life, everything I'd worked for, saved, repaired, cherished. And my son had given strangers the go-ahead to take it all. Here's what people don't tell you about betrayal. It's never loud at first. It's quiet. A small voice inside you that whispers, this shouldn't be happening. A slow awareness spreading through your mind like ink through water. I stood there, in the church parking lot, clutching my phone like it was the only thing keeping me upright. Cars were pulling out one by one, families chatting, kids running around. And I felt completely detached, like I was underwater watching everything from a distance. "Don't touch anything," I managed to say into the phone. "I'm on my way." "Yes?" The mover said quickly. I could hear the apology in his voice now. "We won't move a thing." I hung up and just stood there, breathing hard, feeling my pulse in my temples. I tried to call Ethan. Straight to voicemail. I texted him. No response. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I walked to my car with my heart pounding in my ears, the world narrowing into a tunnel around me. It's strange, the thoughts that flood your mind in crisis. You'd think they'd be sharp, specific, urgent. But mine was scattered, frantic, all over the place. Is he okay? Why would he do this? Is he angry at me again? Did I miss something? Is he in some kind of trouble? Does he hate me that much? What did I do? That last question, it echoed the loudest. What did I do? Because when you're a mother, especially a single mother, especially one who has spent years trying to hold everything together for a child you love more than your own breath, you don't automatically jump to blame them. You blame yourself. The drive home felt longer than it ever had. My town isn't big, just a quiet suburb with rows of ranch-style homes and local diners that still have jukeboxes. Trees arch over the streets like old guardians. Usually, it feels comforting. But that day, the streets felt unfamiliar. The houses felt distant. My own block felt like foreign territory. As I pulled up, I saw the moving truck parked in front of my house, a large white truck with the company's turquoise logo on the side. Two men stood near my front step, both of them looking tense, like they knew something about this didn't feel right. I parked crooked, half in the driveway, half in the yard, and practically jumped out of the car. The men turned to me immediately. One said gently, "Are you Mrs. Carter?" I nodded, too breathless to speak. "We're really sorry," the other one added. "We didn't want to start until we verified. Something felt off." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay composed. "Can you show me the order?" He handed me a clipboard. There it was, my son's handwriting, his signature, a service order requesting full home clearance, furniture, appliances, box goods, personal items. Everything. I stared at it until the words blurred. There was no mistake, no mix-up, no administrative error. Ethan had done this, on purpose, and I had no idea why. The movers offered me space, stepping back respectfully while I stood on my own front lawn trying to process the reality that my child, the person whose first steps I witnessed, whose nightmares I soothed, whose school projects I stayed up late helping with, had tried to empty my life behind my back. "I'm sorry," Tyler, the lead mover, said softly. "We're parents too. We didn't want to move anything without your say-so." I nodded, grateful for their restraint, but too overwhelmed to form a proper thank you. Instead, I walked past them, up the 3 wooden steps, and opened my front door. The house looked the same. My couch, my framed photos, my mother's antique lamp, the quilt I stitched myself, everything still in its place. But now, it all felt different, like it had been moments away from disappearing. I ran my fingers along the hallway wall as if touching it would ground me. Inside, the stillness felt heavier, dense with a kind of emotional humidity. I shouldn't have been shaking as badly as I was. But that's what shock does. It steals your ability to think straight, to breathe evenly, to understand what's happening. I tried calling Ethan again. Voicemail. Again. Each time, it cut off. Each time, it felt like a door slamming in my face. And somewhere between the 4th and 5th attempt, a thought crept into my mind, quiet, unwelcome, terrifying. Maybe he really meant to erase me from this house. Maybe he wanted me gone. It didn't make sense. But betrayal rarely does at the beginning. And as I stood there in the doorway of the home I'd built from scratch, I felt a slow, painful understanding settle like dust in my chest. Something was broken between me and my son. Something bigger than an argument. Something bigger than a misunderstanding. And today was only the start of finding out what it was. But the worst part, deep down, in a place I didn't want to acknowledge yet, I had a feeling this wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't random. It wasn't a moment of anger. No, this felt planned. And that meant something else, something I wasn't ready to admit yet. He had expected me to be gone long enough for him to take everything. But why? And what else had he done that I didn't know about? That final question followed me like a shadow as I stepped deeper into the house, unaware that the real nightmare, the truth, was still waiting to be uncovered. And I was about to stumble right into it. To understand how surreal that moving truck felt sitting in front of my house, I have to back up. Way back, before signatures on clipboards, before shouted phone calls, before my trust had holes in it. I have to go back to when it was just me and my boy, and I honestly believed that love and hard work were going to be enough. I had Ethan when I was 27. We were living in Charlotte back then, in a tiny apartment with peeling paint, a futon that doubled as a bed and couch, and a baby swing wedged between a bookshelf and the kitchen table. His father, Mark, worked construction. I worked nights at a diner and picked up babysitting shifts for neighbors whenever I could. Money was always tight, but back then, we were at least pointed in the same direction. Young, exhausted, hopeful. The usual mix. When Ethan was little, he was the kind of kid who watched everything. He'd sit in his high chair and follow my every move as I cooked, eyes big and curious. He liked lining his toy cars in perfect rows more than crashing them. He didn't shout, he observed. Even as a toddler, he felt serious. I used to joke that he had old soul eyes. Back then, I said it with pride. By the time he was in kindergarten, the apartment felt too small, and the strain between me and Mark had grown into something heavy and permanent. There were fights about bills, about drinking, about who was more tired, more burdened, more right. Ethan heard more of it than I wish he had. One night, after a particularly loud argument about Mark just needing a break that somehow stretched into him disappearing for 3 days, I found Ethan sitting on the floor of his room, lining up his toy cars like soldiers. "Are you okay, baby?" I'd asked. He'd nodded, but his jaw was tight, his little shoulders stiff. "It's fine," he said quietly. "Dad always comes back." He did come back that time, but eventually he didn't. The divorce, when it finally came, wasn't dramatic. No, dramatic is too loud of a word for what actually happened. It was more like erosion. Slow, steady, unavoidable. Mark left for a temporary job out of state when Ethan was 8. He sent some money at first, called a few times. Then the calls got shorter and fewer. The money got inconsistent. Then nothing. I tried to keep things calm for Ethan. Mornings became our little routine of normalcy. Pancakes on Saturdays when I could afford it, cereal when I couldn't. Homework at the kitchen table. Saturdays at the park when the weather was good. I saved every extra dollar. Not for a trip, not for fancy things. For something simple, a house. A place that wasn't rented. A place nobody could decide to take away from us. It took years. Coupons, yard sales, extra shifts. Every small choice chipped away at that dream. When I finally qualified for a modest mortgage on that little 3-bedroom ranch in our quiet North Carolina town, it felt like a miracle I'd built with my own hands. Ethan was 11 when we moved in. He walked through the empty living room, touching the walls like he couldn't quite believe they were ours. "This is our house?" he asked, looking up at me. "Ours," I said. "Not a landlord's. Not a temporary place. Home." He smiled then, the big, genuine kind he didn't pull out very often. "So no one can kick us out?" "Not if I keep paying the mortgage," I laughed, ruffling his hair. "And that part's on me." He nodded, and for a moment he looked relieved in a way that broke my heart a little. Kids shouldn't have to worry about stability like that. But mine did. The years that followed were busy but not extraordinary. In other words, they were exactly what I had been praying for. I got my certification and started working as a preschool teacher. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and it meant I could be home by mid-afternoon most days. The house slowly filled with mismatched furniture from second-hand shops, hand-me-downs from church friends, and things I'd scrimped to buy. That couch in the living room, the one the movers almost carried out? I bought that with my first tax return after the divorce. It wasn't expensive, but it felt like a declaration. We weren't temporary guests in someone else's space anymore. The house smelled like coffee in the mornings and whatever cheap candle I'd found on sale in the evenings. The TV was almost always on some kind of rerun, and the kitchen table was often cluttered with homework sheets, crayons, and grocery lists. Normal. That's what it was. Not perfect. Not picturesque. Just ours. Ethan grew. His serious little face turned into a serious teenage one. He excelled in math, liked computers, and could teach himself anything if he was interested. His teachers called him gifted, bright, promising. I believed it. Maybe too much. Teenage years are rarely smooth, and ours weren't an exception. We argued about grades, about curfews, about hanging out with kids I didn't fully trust. Nothing out of the ordinary, at least from the outside. He'd slam his door. I'd sit on my bed afterward trying not to cry, wondering if I was being too strict or not strict enough. Whenever we did fight, I'd always circle back to one thing: I'm doing the best I can with what I have, Ethan. Sometimes he heard me. Sometimes he didn't. Through everything, I treated that house like a living, breathing member of our family. It sheltered us, held our memories, kept out the world when it felt too harsh. Ethan knew that. He grew up hearing me say it. This house is the one thing I'll never gamble with, I told him once when he brought up me getting a new car. Cars come and go. This stays. He'd rolled his eyes. It's just walls and a roof, Mom. It's more than that, I'd said. You'll understand one day. He'd gone quiet after that, an unreadable look flickering over his face. College brought a shift I hadn't been prepared for. Ethan got into a state university on the other side of North Carolina. It wasn't Ivy League, but it was solid, and considering our finances, it felt like a tremendous accomplishment. I applied for every grant, every aid program I could find. He took out loans. I took out a small parent loan too. The day we dropped him off at his dorm, I remember standing in that narrow little room with cinder block walls, trying not to cry as boys hauled mini-fridges and boxes down the hallway. Ethan looked restless, half excited, half impatient. You'll call me? I asked, straightening his bedspread. Yeah, Mom, he said, distracted, already glancing at his phone. Don't worry, I'll be fine. I'm supposed to worry, I said with a small smile. It's part of the job description. He smiked, hugged me quickly, then pulled away like he didn't want his new roommates to see too much tenderness. I understood. I remembered being 20. As I walked back to the car, the campus buzzing around me, it hit me that for the first time in almost 2 decades, the house would be just mine. No backpacks left on chairs. No shoes by the door. No cereal bowls in the sink. It felt both lonely and strangely peaceful. Those 4 years were a mix of missing him and adjusting to the quiet. I threw myself into work, into church, into small routines that helped the days pass. I called him more than he called me, texted more than he replied. At first, I chalked it up to normal college life, new friends, new experiences, less need for home. When he did come home for holidays, there was always a subtle stiffening in him. He'd stay out late, seemed half present at family dinners, always wanting to get back to campus life. Still, he graduated. A business degree. He wore the cap and gown. I drove hours to sit in a crowded stadium, craning my neck to spot him. When his name was called, pride swelled in my chest so big it hurt. That's my boy, I whispered to nobody. After the ceremony, he posed for pictures, gave me a quick side hug, and introduced me to a couple of friends. One of them, a guy named Ryan, made a joke about Ethan and his $1,000,000 ideas. Ethan laughed, but there was a flicker in his eyes, a spark I recognized. Ambition. We all want better for our kids than we had. I wanted that for him too. I just didn't realize how different our definitions of better were. After graduation, he moved back home just for a few months, as he put it. He said he wanted to save up before getting his own place, maybe start a small business, maybe get into real estate, maybe something else. The plans changed every week. At first, I didn't mind. I loved having him around again. Hearing his footsteps in the hallway, seeing his shoes by the door, watching him raid the fridge like he hadn't eaten in years. It felt like getting a second chance at having him under my roof. But it was different this time. He was different. He wanted the good parts of being an adult, freedom, money, status, but none of the tedious parts. He stayed up late, slept half the day, bounced between short-term jobs that he quit when they bored him. Whenever I'd gently bring it up, he'd deflect. "Relax, Mom," he'd say, scrolling on his phone at the kitchen table. "I've got things in motion." "What things?" I'd ask. "Stuff," he'd reply, vague and dismissive. "You wouldn't get it. It's all online now. You're still thinking like it's 1998. It stung, the way he said it. Like I was an obstacle, not a supporter. But I swallowed it. I told myself it was just a phase. Young adults sometimes take a while to find their footing. I didn't want to be the nagging, overbearing mother. So I gave him time. Room. Space. Maybe too much. One evening, we were both in the living room. I was grading worksheets on the couch, little crayon scribbles from my preschoolers, and Ethan was sitting in the recliner, laptop open, blue light reflecting off his face. He'd been so quiet that I'd almost forgotten he was there, until he broke the silence. "Hey, Mom," he said, not looking up from the screen. "Do you have a will or anything?" I froze, my pen hovering above the paper. "A will," I repeated. "Why?" He shrugged, eyes still on the laptop. "Just stuff I've been listening to. Podcasts and financial planning channels. They say it's important, especially if you own property. Don't you have to, put someone on the deed or decide what happens to the house?" I tried to answer casually, but my heart did a small, strange flutter. "Well, yeah, I have a basic will," I said. "Got one sorted when I refinanced a few years back. Nothing fancy. The house would go to you, obviously, but that's not something we need to worry about for a long time, I hope." He finally glanced up at me then, eyes sharp, expression unreadable. "So it's just me on there?" he asked. "No one else?" "No one else," I said lightly, forcing a smile. "You're my only child. Who else would it be?" He nodded slowly, then looked back at his screen. "Right," he muttered. "Makes sense." I went back to grading, but the room felt different now. There was a thin chill in the air that hadn't been there a moment before, though nothing had visibly changed. It was such a small conversation. On the surface, innocent. Responsibility, planning, adult concerns. But something about the way he asked, the way he'd gone quiet after my answer, the way his eyes had swept the room for a moment, taking in the furniture, the TV, the framed photos. It sent a tiny tremor through me, one I ignored. Back then, I told myself it was just him growing up, finally thinking about the future. I pushed down the unease, tucked it behind my rationalizations, and smoothed a smile over my face. I didn't know it then, but that small, casual question in our living room would echo loud and ugly later, when I was standing in my yard, staring at a moving truck, realizing just how far that future planning of his had gone. And looking back now, I can see it clearly. That was the first hairline crack in the picture I'd painted of my son, the first warning sign I chose not to see. The first real sign that something was wrong didn't come from a dramatic moment. It wasn't a slammed door or a heated argument. It came from a quiet Tuesday afternoon, one of those ordinary days that only turn significant when you look back with hindsight and realize it was the start of everything unraveling. At the time, it barely even registered. But now I can trace everything back to that moment like a thread that was already winding its way toward disaster. Ethan had been home from college for about 6 months then. 6 months of drifting. 6 months of working on something big, but never quite explaining what that something was. He'd come and go at odd hours. Sometimes I'd wake up at 3 a.m. and see the kitchen light still on, his silhouette bent over his laptop. Other days, He wouldn't crawl out of bed until noon. His routine was unpredictable, but mine wasn't. That Tuesday started normally enough. I came home from school around 3:45, tired from a day of wrangling preschoolers, still wearing my chalk-stained cardigan. As soon as I walked in, I sensed the house felt off. Not messy, not loud, just strange, like someone had been rushing through it. There were 2 mugs in the sink. Odd, because Ethan usually left his cups everywhere but rarely in the sink. One mug had coffee grounds stuck along the inside like someone had tried to make coffee too fast. The other mug was empty but smelled faintly of whiskey. I remember pausing, fingers resting on the edge of the counter. Ethan didn't drink often. At least, not that I knew of. Maybe he had company, I thought. Maybe he's finally making friends outside those online circles he's always talking about. I let myself believe that. But it wasn't the mugs that bothered me the most. It was the door. The door to the guest bedroom, my old craft room, was closed. Completely closed. Ethan never used it. He barely stepped foot in that room since he moved back home. And suddenly, seeing it shut tight in the middle of the afternoon sent a ripple of unease across my skin. I walked over quietly, as if I might disturb someone on the other side, and pressed my ear to the door. Nothing. Just silence. Still, something told me to try the handle. It was locked. Locked. That door had never needed a lock. I didn't even remember installing one. My hand lingered on the doorknob longer than it should have. I felt ridiculous standing there, listening to nothing, imagining possibilities I had no reason to imagine. But the thought stuck in my head. Why would Ethan lock a room he never uses? And what was he keeping inside? I didn't mention it to him that night. When he came into the kitchen around 7 p.m., hair messy, wearing the same hoodie he'd had on the day before, he seemed frantic. Not outwardly, but in the subtle ways a mother notices. He kept checking his phone, kept pacing, kept sighing under his breath like he was waiting for something, an update, a message, a decision. "You okay?" I finally asked while chopping vegetables for dinner. "Yeah," he said quickly, too quickly. "Just busy." "With what?" He shrugged. "Work stuff." I wanted to ask, what work? What stuff? Why is the guest room locked? Why were there 2 mugs in the sink, one smelling like whiskey? But instead I nodded and went back to chopping. It wasn't fear that made me stay quiet. It was the desire not to push him away. But the silence sat between us like a third person at the table. And I swear, when he glanced toward the hallway, toward that locked door, his jaw tightened. A small discovery, but an important one. Whatever was in that room mattered to him more than he wanted me to know. Over the next few days, the signs multiplied, not loudly, but steadily, like pebbles dropping into a pond. Feist! Packages started arriving. Small ones at first. Unmarked. No return address. Ethan would snatch them up from the porch before I could even ask what they were. Then bigger ones showed up. Long, heavy boxes that made the porch boards groan when he dragged them inside. "New equipment," he said once, avoiding eye contact. "For what?" I asked. "Just stuff," he muttered, disappearing down the hallway. Always toward that door. Always locking it behind him. Another pebble. Then the phone calls started. Late-night ones. Rapid whispers in his room with the door barely closed. Sometimes he'd step outside on the back porch, pacing like he was on the verge of something. I couldn't hear the words, but I heard the tone, a rushed, nervous intensity that didn't sound like a side project or hobby. It sounded like pressure. Sometimes, when he hung up, he'd mutter, "Idiot," under his breath, though I could never tell if he meant himself or the person on the other end. Another pebble. And then came the papers. I found them accidentally while doing laundry, loose sheets of printer paper left in his pant pockets, crumpled invoices, estimates, scribbled notes with numbers crossed out, and one phrase circled in thick black marker. High-value liquidation opportunity. Liquidation. The word struck me like a spark landing on dry leaves. Liquidation of what? I tried not to think too hard. I told myself it was probably his online business idea, maybe flipping electronics or refurbishing old computers. People sell strange things online these days. But deep down, something inside me was shifting. A mother's intuition, something I'd relied on since Ethan was small, began whispering that whatever he was involved in wasn't simple, wasn't harmless, wasn't stable. And the biggest pebble dropped the following weekend. It was a quiet Saturday morning. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee when Ethan walked in, fully dressed, jacket in hand. "I'll be gone most of the day," he said, grabbing his keys. "Where are you headed?" I asked lightly. He froze, just for a second, but I saw it, the tiny hesitation before he answered. "A meeting." "What kind of meeting?" "Work," he muttered, already turning away. I tried to drill a hole through his back with my eyes, hoping he'd give me more. But he didn't. As he was about to step outside, his phone buzzed. He looked at it and sighed, running a hand through his hair like someone stealing themselves. Then he did something unusual. He stepped back inside and walked down the hall, right toward that locked door. He paused in front of it, listening. Then, confirming I wasn't watching, he whispered, "Yeah, I'll be there. Just make sure it's ready." He wasn't alone in the hall. He thought he was whispering to someone on the phone. But those words landed clearly in my ears. "Make sure it's ready." And suddenly, everything, the locked door, the packages, the invoices, the tension, the phone calls, began forming a shape. A jagged, ugly shape. I didn't have proof. I didn't even know what I was suspecting yet. But the feeling was unmistakable. Something was being planned behind my back. Something big. Something that involved the house. And the idea lodged in me like a splinter. Ethan wasn't just hiding something. He was preparing for something. The next incident, the one that truly shifted everything from suspicion to fear, happened 2 days later. I came home early from work because one of my coworkers had offered to take my afternoon class. I let myself in quietly, the way you do when you expect someone might be napping or working. But the house wasn't quiet. I heard movement, fast movement, from the hallway, a door slamming shut, then the quick click of a lock. My stomach flipped. I stepped into the hallway and called out, "Ethan?" Silence. Then, after a moment too long to be casual, his voice answered, "Yeah." "Were you in the guest room?" Pause. That pause told me everything. "No," he said, too flatly. My throat tightened. I took a step closer, heart beating unevenly. "Ethan, open the door." Another beat of silence. Then footsteps. The lock clicking. The door opening only a few inches. He stood there blocking the doorway, breathing a little too fast. His hair was messy, his expression tight, like someone caught in the middle of something. "What's going on in there?" I asked quietly. "Nothing," he said. "It's just storage. Please, Mom, don't start." I heard noise. I dropped something. I tried to push the door open a bit more, not enough to invade, just enough to peek past him. He stepped forward, blocking the view entirely. My palms went cold. "Mom," he said, voice sharp now. "Stop. Just stop. I'm handling things. I'm working on something. You don't need to worry about it." I stared at him, trying to read his face, trying to figure out where the sweet little boy with the toy cars had gone. But his expression was closed off, guarded, almost defensive. "Okay," I whispered. "Just be honest with me." "I am," he snapped. He wasn't. He closed the door behind him, locking it again. This time, loudly. I stood there, staring at that door for a long time, feeling my heartbeat in my throat. That was the moment I knew with a certainty I hated, that something very wrong was growing inside my own home. Something I couldn't name yet. Something I couldn't stop. Something I didn't understand. But every small discovery, every uneasy detail, every unanswered question, they were all pushing me toward one truth. Whatever Ethan was planning, whatever he was hiding, whatever he was preparing for, it wasn't something that included me. And before long, I would learn exactly how far he was willing to go to get what he wanted. That locked door wasn't hiding clutter. It was hiding intent. And I was about to find out just how destructive that intent really was. The thing about the truth is that it doesn't explode all at once. It leaks. A drip here, a drip there, and then suddenly you look down and realize you're standing in a flood you never saw coming. For weeks I'd been brushing off the warning signs, the locked room, the packages, the whispers, the tension in his jaw. But discovering the truth wasn't one moment. It was a series of them, each one carving away another layer of denial until there was nothing left to protect me. And it began with the smallest, simplest thing, a bill. It was a Wednesday afternoon. I remember it clearly because I had come home from work with a headache forming behind my eyes, the kind that comes from too much noise and too little patience. I opened the mailbox out of habit, flipping through envelopes without really looking. Electric bill, insurance notice, junk coupons, then a thick white envelope I didn't recognize. It was addressed to me, but the sender was a company I'd never done business with. Something about the weight of it made my stomach clench. Inside was a past due notice, a large one, for a financial service account I had never opened. At first I thought it was a scam, but tucked behind the bill was a copy of an online form, one with my name, my address, and a signature that looked almost like mine but wasn't. I felt the blood drain from my face. Identity theft. My hand shook as I read the details again, and again, and again. Then the truth slid into place like a puzzle piece snapping down. Someone had opened an account in my name. Someone with access to my mail and my personal information. Someone who lived under my own roof. I sat down on the steps, bill trembling in my hands, and felt the first real crack inside me. It wasn't fear yet, just disbelief. The kind that sits heavy in your chest and makes your mind go quiet. I wanted to be wrong. I needed to be wrong. But deep down, a part of me already knew I wasn't. I didn't confront Ethan right away. I wanted proof, something undeniable. So I started noticing things I'd previously ignored. Ethan's backpack was suddenly heavier than usual. He kept it zipped shut around me, never leaving it unattended. He was more protective of his laptop, keeping it angled away whenever I walked past, closing tabs with too much urgency. And the calls, they became more frequent, more heated, more secretive. One night, I heard him on the porch, voice low but sharp. "No, I told you, it'll be handled. Just give me 2 more weeks." A pause. I said I'll deliver. "Don't rush me." Another pause. "I know what I'm doing." He didn't know I was in the hallway, frozen in place, listening to every syllable. It didn't sound like work. It didn't sound like a project. It sounded like pressure from someone who expected something from him, something he couldn't give, something he was desperate to promise anyway. The next piece of evidence came from the one place I didn't expect to look, the kitchen junk drawer. I was searching for batteries for the remote. The drawer was overflowing, receipts, old pens, scissors, a few rubber bands. I was digging through when I found a folded sheet of paper tucked beneath a stack of takeout menus. At first glance it looked like nothing, just another printed invoice. But when I opened it, my heart dropped. It was an estimate from a moving company, a different company than the one that had shown up on Sunday, dated 3 weeks earlier. Full residential clearance, 3-bedroom house estimated hours, 6 to 8 notes, owner will be off property. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. The room tilted. The words on the page seemed to vibrate. This wasn't a sudden idea. This wasn't impulsive. He'd been planning it. Planning to clear the house out. Planning to treat my home, our home, like inventory on a spreadsheet. My hands gripped the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. "Why?" I whispered to myself. "What are you doing, Ethan?" But the paper didn't answer. It only confirmed what I'd been afraid to accept. This wasn't about anger, or a fight, or a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. Still, the locked room nagged at me. Every time I walked past it, I felt its presence like a bruise I couldn't stop touching. I had avoided investigating. A part of me didn't want to know what was inside, because knowing meant the last shred of hope, the hope that maybe I was misreading everything, would vanish. But the day after I found that moving estimate, my fear finally broke wide open. It was late, around 1 a.m., and I woke from a dead sleep to a noise, a muffled thump. then another. The house was dark and silent except for that sound. Coming from down the hall. Coming from the locked room. I slipped out of bed, heart pounding, and padded down the hallway in socked feet. A soft glow leaked out from under the door. I pressed my ear against it. Rustling. Shifting. Paper. Boxes? I couldn't tell. Then Ethan's voice, a strained whisper. He was talking to someone. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. Urgency. Stress. Panic. A chill ran through me. Everything in my body told me to walk away. To pretend I heard nothing. To keep sleeping and avoid becoming part of whatever this was. But denial only protects you until the truth grows too big to ignore. So I stepped back, took a breath, and knocked. The noise stopped instantly. Ethan. My voice sounded small. Everything okay? There was a long, heavy pause. Then, yeah, Mom, I'm fine. Why are you awake? I heard something. It's nothing. I dropped a box. Can I come in? Another pause. No, just one word. Firm. Cold. The part of me that had been holding on, waiting for reassurance, for explanation, for something normal, that part snapped, just a little. Ethan, I said softly, you're scaring me. Silence. Then, unexpectedly, I heard his breath catch. A tiny sound, like he'd been punched from the inside. Please, Mom, he whispered. Just go back to bed. Don't worry about this. I can't not worry, I said. I'm your mother. I know, he said, voice cracking, but just don't. There was something trembling underneath his words that made my chest ache. Fear? Guilt? Shame? I didn't know. But I walked back to my room with that trembling stuck inside me. Because if he sounded like that, whatever he was involved in was worse than I had imagined. The final straw, the moment everything collapsed, came 3 days later. It was Saturday morning. I was cleaning the living room when I heard the front door open. Ethan rushed in quickly, too quickly, like someone slipping inside to avoid being seen. He didn't notice me at first. He was carrying something, a black binder, thick, stuffed full of papers. He went straight down the hall and into the locked room. And this time, he forgot to shut the door all the way behind him. Just enough for me to see. Just enough for the truth to slam into me so hard I felt winded. Inside that room were boxes, stacks of them, some open, some sealed, labeled, living room, kitchen, master bedroom, garage, linens, appliances. It was my home, my entire home, categorized, sorted, tagged, for removal, for sale, always, for whatever liquidation opportunity he had scribbled in those notes. And taped to the far wall, the wall he had always stood in front of, was a blueprint of my house. A checklist beside each room, items numbered, crossed off as completed. My legs weakened. I had to grip the doorway to steady myself. He wasn't planning to move out. He was planning to move me out. Erase me from my own house. Strip it down like an asset he could convert into fast cash. And I suddenly understood why he kept asking about the will. Why he cared so much about what would happen to the house. Why he needed me off the property long enough for movers to clear everything. It wasn't just money. It was ownership, control, desperation. I didn't remember walking back into the living room. I only remember standing there, trembling, trying not to cry so loudly he'd hear it. The house felt unfamiliar then. Cold, shallow, like the walls themselves knew something I didn't. My entire world, everything I had fought for, worked for, sacrificed for, had been transformed behind my back into a spreadsheet of valuables. By my own son, my Ethan, the boy who lined toy cars in neat little rows, the boy who asked if anyone could kick us out of our home, the boy who once smiled as he touched the walls of our house for the first time. Now he was scheming to empty it. And that realization, that truth, it shattered me. Left me standing alone in the middle of the living room with only one thought echoing in my head. How did we get here? And what else was he planning that I still didn't know? Because the boxes, the lists, the locked door, it wasn't the lowest point. Not yet. That part was still coming. and it would destroy the last fragile piece of hope I had left. I always thought the worst moment of my life would be the discovery itself. The revelation that my son, my only child, had been plotting to clear my house, empty it of everything I owned, treat it like property he could liquidate. But strangely, the worst moment wasn't discovering the boxes, or seeing the blueprint taped to the wall, or realizing he'd forged my signature to open accounts in my name. The worst moment came the next morning, when Ethan walked into the kitchen like nothing was wrong. He poured himself coffee, opened the fridge, whistled lightly under his breath, and all I could do was stand there and watch him, this grown man who had once been my little boy, acting as if he hadn't been planning the most devastating betrayal of my life. I felt something inside me shift then, a slow, steady movement, like tectonic plates settling into a new position after a quake. Not anger, not fear, not even heartbreak, something calmer, colder, a kind of emotional stillness I had never felt before, because I suddenly understood something very clearly. If I kept pretending nothing was wrong, I would lose everything. And Ethan, he would keep taking until there was nothing left to take. That quiet breakfast scene felt surreal. He sat at the table scrolling on his phone, nodding lightly to whatever he was reading. The sunlight hit his hair at the same angle it always did. His fingers drummed the same beat on the table as when he was a teenager. He even hummed the same tune he used to hum on the way to middle school. But the comfort I used to feel when he was in the house was gone, replaced with a sharp, cutting awareness that I couldn't unsee. This wasn't a child who made a mistake. This wasn't confusion or rebellion. This wasn't immaturity. He was calm, methodical, confident. He believed he had already won. And when he finally looked up from his phone and said, "Morning," I realized he had absolutely no idea I'd seen his plans. He wasn't trying to hide guilt. He didn't feel any. That was the moment my grief turned into resolve. If he wasn't going to protect me, I was going to protect myself. For the first time in months, I left the house without telling him where I was going. Truthfully, I wasn't sure myself. I only knew I needed to think, but not inside the walls he had already mapped and labeled like inventory. So I drove, past the downtown, past the school, past the neighborhoods where I used to take him trick-or-treating. I kept going until the road stretched quiet and the traffic thinned out. And when I finally pulled into a small public park, nearly empty on a weekday morning, I just sat in my car with my hands gripping the steering wheel. Everything inside me felt twisted, bruised, tender. How do you confront your own child about something like this? How do you tell your son you know he's been plotting to erase you from your life? How do you protect your home without destroying whatever fragile thread of love might still exist? I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew I would, because I had to. Sitting there in the quiet, I forced myself to breathe, to gather the pieces of myself that had shattered one discovery at a time, to sort through the memories, the good, the bad, the painful, and find a way to stand on solid emotional ground again. For the first time in weeks, I told myself a truth I'd been terrified to face. Ethan wasn't going to stop. Not on his own. Not because he suddenly felt guilty. Not because he realized how deeply he was hurting me. Whatever had twisted inside him, whatever desperation or entitlement had taken root, it was bigger than my hopes for him. Bigger than my memories. Bigger than the motherly instinct that kept telling me, "You can fix this." I couldn't say when the line had been crossed, but it had, and now I needed to act. Quietly, deliberately, carefully. So I made a plan, not loud, not dramatic, not driven by anger, but built from clarity. Step 1, protect my home. Before I even got out of the car, I called the county recorder's office. I asked questions I never expected to ask in my lifetime. How to restrict access to property records. How to flag suspicious activity involving deeds. How to prevent unauthorized changes to ownership. The woman on the phone was patient. And when she finally said, "You're doing the right thing by being cautious," I felt a small piece of the panic inside me loosen. Step 2, secure my finances. Next, I called the number on the fraudulent bill. I filed a fraud report. I flagged my credit. I froze anything that could be frozen. The representative asked gently, "Do you know who might have done this?" I opened my mouth, closed it, and then said, "Yes, I do." My voice didn't shake. Not even a little. Step 3. Document everything. I drove home with a steadiness I didn't expect. I walked past Ethan in the living room. He barely glanced up from his phone and went straight to the guest room. The locked door. The symbol of weeks of secrecy. My hand hovered above the doorknob. I didn't open it. Not yet. Not without proof. Not without protection. So instead, I photographed the outside of the door. The shipping labels left in the trash. The invoice in the junk drawer. The financial notice. Every scrap of evidence I could gather without stepping into a fight I wasn't prepared for. Step 4. Control access. That afternoon, while Ethan was out, I called a locksmith. A quiet man named Harold arrived in a gray van and replaced the deadbolts on all 3 exterior doors. He didn't ask why. He didn't judge. When he finished, he placed the new keys in my hand. "You'll feel better tonight," he said softly. He was right. For the first time in months, I felt a barrier, thin but real, between me and whatever Ethan was planning. Step 5. Confront him, but on my terms. This part took the longest to plan. I didn't want a screaming match. I didn't want him to twist my words. I didn't want manipulation or guilt thrown in my face. I wanted clarity. And I wanted the truth, not the one he fed me, but the one he'd been hiding. So I rehearsed, quietly, inside my head. Short sentences. No open-ended questions. No room for excuses. Simple, direct statements. And one bottom-line rule. Anything involving my home, my finances, or my identity was no longer negotiable. Not because I didn't love him, but because love without boundaries isn't love. It's surrender. The emotional reflection came later that night. Once the logistic planning was done, once the locks were changed, once I'd taken back control of the things Ethan had silently slipped from my hands. I sat on the couch, wrapped in an old blanket, staring at the bookshelf across the room. Photos, years of birthdays, school plays, vacations, Christmas mornings. Every picture showed a version of Ethan that felt a million miles away from the man living down the hall. And the ache in my chest returned. Not frantic anymore. Not sharp. Just deep. A deep, tired ache of a mother who had tried her best and was watching it slip through her fingers anyway. I cried. Quietly. Not from fear this time, but from acceptance. Something in our relationship had broken. Maybe long ago. Maybe slowly. But now I could finally see it. And with that acceptance came the calmest resolve I'd ever felt. Because once you stop fighting the truth, you can finally act on it. Ethan came home late that night. I heard the door shut. His footsteps. The familiar creak of the floorboard outside his room. He didn't realize the locks were new. That alone told me everything I needed to know. He assumed control. He assumed access. He assumed ownership. And assumptions make people sloppy. I waited in my room until the house settled into silence. Then I whispered to myself the final step of my plan. Tomorrow, I take back my home. Not with shouting. Not with threats. Not with emotional pleas. But with truth. With boundaries. With control he no longer deserved to have. And if he thought he could bulldoze the life I built, the life he grew up in, without consequence, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. Because the woman he thought he could manipulate, the woman he assumed would always bend, always forgive, always absorb the damage, she didn't exist anymore. And the one who took her place was ready, very ready, for a confrontation he would not see coming. The next morning, I woke up different. Steady, clear, focused. No more denial. No more waiting. No more hoping Ethan would somehow wake up and realize what he was doing. It was time. He was still asleep when I stepped out of my room. His door was cracked an inch, enough for me to hear the soft rhythm of his breathing. The same boy I raised, and the same man who had planned to empty my home behind my back. I didn't let myself feel anything. Not yet. I walked straight to the guest room. The locked room. The room he'd treated like a vault. I pulled the extra key the locksmith had given me from my pocket. The one Ethan didn't know existed. The key slid into the lock, turned smoothly, And for the first time in weeks, the door opened without resistance. What I saw inside dropped the ground out from under me, but I didn't flinch. Boxes, stacks of them, 3 rows high, neatly labeled with categories: furniture, electronics, kitchen, decor, tools, linens. Everything arranged like a warehouse inventory. My life, my things, my memories, reduced to rows and columns. In the corner, the binder he'd carried the day before. Thick, heavy, stuffed with papers. I opened it. Inside were pages of spreadsheets, lists of items from every room of the house, with estimated resale values next to each one. Another section held screenshots of messages, texts between Ethan and someone saved as J. Morris, buyer contacts. Everything should be cleared by the 22nd. Liquidation will cover most of the debt. She'll be out for several hours on Sundays. Don't worry, she won't fight it. Me. I closed the binder gently. No shaking. My heartbeat was calm. This was the proof. More than enough. Footsteps padded down the hallway. Ethan. He appeared in the doorway, hair messy, wearing sweatpants, mid-yawn, until he saw me standing there. His face drained instantly. "Mom," he said, voice cracking. I held up the binder. "This," I said quietly, "is over." His jaw clenched. He swallowed hard. His eyes darted around the room like he needed to gather it all up at once and hide it behind his back. "Mom, you're misunderstanding." "No," I cut in. "Short, sharp, cold. Not this time. I'm not misunderstanding anything." He stepped into the room, hands raised slightly like he was approaching a skittish animal. "Listen, just let me explain." "Explain what?" My voice was steady. The forged signature, the moving orders, the liquidation plans, the boxes labeled with everything I own. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The silence was louder than shouting. He looked down, eyes flicking to the open binder. "I didn't mean for you to find it like this," he whispered. "What you meant doesn't matter," I said. "What you did matters." He took a step closer. Too close. I stepped back. His eyes flickered, something between frustration and desperation. "Mom, I needed money, okay? Things got out of control. I was gonna put it all back once." "No," I said again, firmer this time. "You weren't." His jaw tightened. His facade cracked. Not into guilt, but into anger. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under," he snapped. "I was trying to fix everything. You think your life is the only one that matters." There it was. The entitlement. The resentment he'd been hiding for months. "I've supported you your entire life," I said. My voice stayed soft, cold, controlled. "I gave you a home. I kept you safe. I paid for everything I could. And this is how you repay me." His nostrils flared. He ran a hand through his hair sharply. "I was desperate," he yelled. "You have no idea what I owe. I thought I could handle it. I thought if I sold some stuff." "Some stuff?" I echoed, gesturing around the room. "You planned to empty the entire house, without telling me, while I was at church." He froze. That detail hit him like a punch. "You talked to the movers?" he asked quietly. "Yes." His shoulders sagged, like a child caught stealing. Except this was far beyond stealing. "I didn't want to hurt you," he whispered. "You did," I said. Not angry, not shaking, just stating the truth. "I didn't have a choice," he muttered. "You did," I said again. Another truth. He looked around the room, at the boxes, the notes, the blueprint, and for a moment I saw the boy he used to be. Lost, small, ashamed, but then something hardened in his eyes. "Fine," he said, voice flat. "So what now? You gonna kick me out?" A cruel question, designed to guilt me, to corner me. For a moment, I felt the old instinct rise, to protect him, to soften, to explain, to accommodate. But I didn't let it win. "For now," I said calmly, "you're leaving the house." He blinked, stunned. "You're serious?" "Yes." You're kicking out your own son. I'm removing someone who planned to rob me, I said. That person happens to be my son. That's the only tragedy here. The words hit him hard. I could tell by the way his breath shook. You can't do this, he said. I don't have anywhere to go. You didn't worry about where I would go, I replied, when you planned all this. His mouth opened, closed. No excuse came. I pointed toward the hallway. Pack your things. Not mine. Yours. You have 1 hour. His eyebrows shot up. He laughed once, a short, bitter, disbelieving sound. You think you can just... I already changed the locks, I said simply. That stopped him cold. You what? You heard me. His face twisted, anger, shock, betrayal. All the emotions he should have felt before he tried to betray me. You're unbelievable, he spat. And you, I said quietly, are no longer welcome here. The next hour was fast, sharp, tense. He stomped around, shoving clothes into a backpack, muttering under his breath, calling me unfair, cruel, heartless. None of it touched me. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt in control. When he finally slung the backpack over his shoulder, he stood in the doorway, eyes wild. You're going to regret this, he said. No, I replied. I'm going to recover from this. He stayed at me, waiting, expecting me to crack. I didn't. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The new lock clicked into place, a clean, solid sound. And for the first time in a long time, the house exhaled. So did I. But the climax wasn't only the confrontation. It was what came minutes later. Because after Ethan left, after the door slammed, after his footsteps faded, his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. He'd forgotten it. A preview notification lit up the screen. A message from the same contact as before. Is the house cleared? Payment is ready. Don't screw this up, Ethan. My entire body went cold. It was final proof that this wasn't just desperation. It was danger. Whoever he was involved with, they weren't just expecting him to empty my house. They were waiting for it. And suddenly, it wasn't just about protecting my home. It was about protecting myself. Because Ethan hadn't only betrayed me, he'd entangled me with people who didn't care whether I existed or not. And the consequences of his choices, they weren't done with me yet. When the door closed behind Ethan for the last time, the house went quiet. Not the comfortable kind of quiet I used to cherish after long days at the preschool. Not the morning quiet filled with coffee smells and humming appliances. No, this was the kind of quiet that feels like someone pulled all the air out of the walls. For a long moment, I just stood there in the living room, listening to the silence settle around me like dust. My hands were still trembling, though the confrontation had ended. My heartbeat was slowing, but uneven, like it couldn't decide whether to rest or sprint. The house looked exactly the same, the couch still in its place, the framed photos still on the shelf, the lamp still crooked the way it always leaned. But I wasn't the same. Something inside me had cracked open so wide that all the old habits, the forgiving, the explaining, the smoothing over, had drained out with the confrontation. There was no going back to the mother I was before that morning. And maybe that was the saddest part. I didn't touch anything for a while. I didn't clean, or tidy, or straighten the crooked lampshade I always fixed without thinking. I just walked slowly through the house, room by room, trying to convince myself that it was still mine. The locked room, the guest room, was the hardest to step into again. Even with the proof gathered, even with Ethan gone, even with the calm resolve I had carried through the confrontation. Crossing that threshold again felt like walking into a crime scene of someone else's intentions. The boxes were still perfectly stacked, the labels still crisp, the blueprint still taped to the wall like a threat. But this time, I didn't cry. This time, I didn't freeze. I started cutting the tape, one box at a time. My hands were slow, deliberate, steady. Each slice of the packing knife felt symbolic, undoing the future Ethan had planned without my consent. Linens, kitchen, tools, garage. Item by item, I took back my home. Not because I needed to unpack anything, Not because things were gone, but because reclaiming the space mattered more than I realized. With every box I opened, the anger softened a little. Not forgiveness, not forgetfulness, just release. Because the deeper wound wasn't the boxes themselves. It was the thought that my son had labeled my life like merchandise. Undoing that act felt like untangling the rope he had tied around me. Once the room was cleared and the last box closed, I sat on the floor in the light coming from the small window, legs crossed like a child. The binder sat beside me, thick and heavy, a physical symbol of the betrayal that had taken weeks to build. I knew I couldn't keep it, but I also couldn't throw it away yet. Not until I understood what came next. The question I had been avoiding all morning finally pressed its way into my mind. What do I do now? Do I call the police? Do I pretend it didn't happen? Do I reach out to Ethan? Do I cut him out completely? Do I give him one last chance? Do I try to fix what can't be fixed? Nothing felt certain. Except one thing. I needed advice. Real advice. Not motherly instinct. Not love clouding judgment. Not fear making the choices for me. So I called the only person who had known me before I was ever a mother, my sister, Lauren. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice was warm, familiar, steady. Hey sis, everything okay? And for the first time that day, the tears came. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, uncontrollable leaking that came from someplace deeper than words. Can you talk? I whispered. Of course. What's going on? I told her everything. Not the softened version. Not the sugar-coated one. The entire truth, piece by piece, the way it had all unfolded. There was a long stretch of silence at the end. I could practically hear her trying to process it. Finally she exhaled. A long, heavy breath. Oh my God, she whispered. Honey, I'm so sorry. I don't know what to do, I said, voice cracking again. You did the right thing, she said. You did exactly what you needed to do. It doesn't feel right, I said. It feels like I failed. No, she said firmly. He failed you. There's a difference. That sentence settled in my chest like a stone dropping into deep water. He's my son, I whispered. The words felt so fragile. And you're a human being, she replied. One who deserves safety, and respect, and a home that's actually yours. I closed my eyes. Let her words sink in. Let myself breathe again. Do I call the police? I finally asked. She paused, then answered carefully. Not today. You've done enough today. You protected yourself. You confronted him. You're safe. That's step one. Tomorrow, you call a lawyer. And you take it from there. A lawyer. The thought made my stomach turn. But the logic was undeniable. Can you come over? I asked quietly. I don't want to be alone right now. I'm already grabbing my keys, she said. Lauren arrived 20 minutes later, letting herself in with the soft knock that always came first. When she saw me, blanket around my shoulders, eyes red, face exhausted, she just wrapped her arms around me without saying a word. And I melted into her hug. For a moment, I wasn't a betrayed mother. I wasn't a woman reclaiming her home. I wasn't trying to be strong. I was just a sister who needed someone to hold her together for 5 minutes. We spent the entire afternoon talking, slowly, carefully, step by step. She helped me sort through the binder. She helped me make a list of what needed to be secured. She helped me breathe. And she confirmed something I had needed to hear from someone who didn't live inside my guilt. You're not overreacting. You're not dramatic. You're not cruel. You're protecting yourself from someone who put you in danger. Danger. The word felt strange when said out loud, but accurate. Because after Ethan stormed out, I kept thinking about that final message on his phone. Is the house cleared? Payment is ready. Don't screw this up. The problem wasn't only Ethan's betrayal. It was the people on the other side of those messages. People who expected something. People who thought Ethan could deliver. People who might blame me for stopping him. That thought created a new layer of fear. A cold one. Before Lauren left that evening, she squeezed my hands and said, "Stay with me tonight." I almost said yes. I wanted to. I was tired, drained, raw. And yet, I can't, I whispered. If I leave, I'll feel like the house isn't mine anymore. She nodded. She understood. Then I'll stay with you, she said. And she did. We locked every door, every window, every latch. For the first time since this began, I slept through the night, not deeply, not peacefully, but without waking in panic. That was enough. The next morning, I called a lawyer. He listened patiently, asked precise questions, requested copies of the binder, the invoices, the forged signature, the messages. And then he told me calmly, "You have every legal right to secure yourself and your property. If he returns, you are not obligated to let him in. And if he attempts to force entry or remove property, call the police immediately." "What about the debt?" I asked. His voice softened. "That's not your debt. And you are not responsible for cleaning up the consequences of his actions." I felt something inside me loosen. Just slightly. Just enough. After that call, I contacted the fraudulent account provider, then my bank, then the credit bureau. Step by step, piece by piece, I dug myself out of the hole Ethan had pushed me toward. There were tears. There was exhaustion. There was grief, raw and hollow. Not for the house, not for the money, but for the idea of motherhood I'd held onto for 26 years. The illusion that no matter how complicated things got, the bond between mother and child was stronger than betrayal. It wasn't. Not this time. And accepting that was the slowest, hardest part of the resolution. A week passed before I heard from Ethan again. A text. Not an apology. Not an explanation. Not remorse. Just, "Can we talk?" I stayed at the screen for a long time. My hands didn't shake. My breath didn't catch. I simply felt tired. I typed slowly. "Not yet." Because forgiveness isn't a doorway someone else gets to walk through whenever they want. It's a boundary, a deliberate choice, and I wasn't ready, and maybe I never would be. But the house was quiet again. A healthier quiet this time. A reclaimed quiet. My home, my life, my space, and me, a woman who finally understood that survival sometimes means letting go of the people you love most. Not because you stopped loving them, but because they stopped loving you in a way that kept you safe. And as the days passed, the house slowly became mine again, not just legally, but emotionally. Even still, a question lingered in the back of my mind, soft but persistent. What kind of future do I have with a son who nearly destroyed me? The answer wasn't clear yet, but the moral of it, the meaning, the message I'd share with anyone who listened. That part was forming. Quietly, slowly, honestly. When I finally sat down to record this story, to tell it all the way through, I realized something I hadn't been able to see clearly while living it. This wasn't a story about a son betraying his mother. Not entirely. It was a story about boundaries, about what happens when love goes unbalanced for too long, about how painful it is to accept that protecting yourself sometimes means stepping away from the person you protected your entire life. In the weeks after everything happened, the house slowly became peaceful again. Not instantly, not completely, but gradually, like a wound healing from the inside out. Every day felt quieter in a new way. Not empty, just honest. I started cooking again, the way I used to before I felt like I had to tiptoe around my own kitchen. I spent time tending the garden out back, clipping dead branches and planting new ones. I even opened the blinds in the living room again, letting the sunlight in without worrying someone else might be planning to take what I'd worked for. The strange part is that the house wasn't what I was mourning anymore. It never truly was. I was grieving the picture of motherhood I had carried for 26 years. The dream that if I loved enough, fought enough, sacrificed enough, my child would always see me as a safe place, not a stepping stone. But sometimes life teaches you a difficult truth. You can raise someone with everything you have, and they can still choose a path that leads them away from you. Not because you failed, not because you didn't love enough, but because they are their own person, with their own faults, their own weaknesses, their own shadows. Accepting that doesn't mean you stop loving them. It means you stop letting their choices destroy you. And that's what changed me. Not the confrontation, Not the betrayal. Not the fear. The change came the moment I realized I could rebuild without waiting for him to change first. Healing didn't look dramatic. It looked like small, steady things, fixing the fence he promised he'd repair but never did. Throwing away the binder of inventory lists without shaking. Sitting on the porch with a cup of tea and realizing I wasn't scared to be alone. Replacing the locks again, this time because I wanted to, not because I needed to. People sometimes ask me if I regret kicking Ethan out. If I regret drawing that line. If I regret protecting myself so firmly. And the truth is, no, I don't. Not because I'm heartless. Not because I stopped caring. But because I finally understood that letting someone hurt you again and again isn't love. It's sacrifice turned into self-destruction. Ethan has texted a few times since that day. Short messages. No apologies. No accountability. Just words floating in from a distance he doesn't know how to cross anymore. Maybe one day he'll come back differently. Maybe he won't. Maybe our relationship will mend in small, tentative ways over the years. Or maybe this moment is the beginning of a new kind of distance. I don't know. And for the first time, that uncertainty doesn't terrify me. Because I learned something important. Something I wish I had understood earlier in my life. You can love someone deeply and still choose yourself. You can care about someone and still refuse to let them tear your life apart. You can be a mother without sacrificing every piece of who you are. Sometimes love is gentle. Sometimes love is patient. But sometimes love is letting go. Not out of anger, but out of survival. So if anyone listening has ever been in my shoes, feeling guilt over choosing safety, feeling shame over setting boundaries, feeling torn between love and self-preservation, I want you to hear this. You are allowed to protect your own life, even from the people you love most, especially from the people you love most. And you are not a bad person for choosing peace over chaos. I'm still healing. I'm still grieving. I'm still learning how to balance the mother I was with the woman I'm becoming. But I'm standing. I'm safe. I'm in my home. And I'm rebuilding my life on my terms. That, to me, is worth everything. Did you like my story? Please like and subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far this story of mine travels. And here's my final thought, the one sentence that stayed with me long after the dust settled. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is protect your own heart, even when the danger comes from someone you love.